I have the pleasure of speaking with Inga James, the former executive director of Hartley House, and you are now part of Trauma Responsive Frederick, a nonprofit, and you've just launched Nonprofit Growth Strategies of Maryland. So you didn't take leaving Hartley House and decide to retire. You're now doing lots of great things for our nonprofits and the community here in Frederick. So welcome to Good Morning, Frederick.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a friend who told me that you can't say you're retiring, you say you're refiring.
I love it. I love it. Yes, that's great. Let's talk a little bit because we did talk with Dr. Rachel Mandel over the summer about trauma responsive Frederick, but I think it's very important to keep that organization top of mind for some corporate partners who may need to enlist your services. Remind people what Trauma Responsive Frederick is all about.
The primary main goal is to create a trauma responsive community. So it's social change and norm change. And we are working towards that goal, that broad social change through education, advocacy, and collaboration. And so we're working on kind of in the back room doing training and public awareness events and social media, doing things to help people understand the impacts of trauma. I mean, and pretty much what trauma is and how it impacts us and why we have to be mindful of it.
Yeah, and that's a heavy lift, obviously, and it's continuum, right? So as things change, the needs of the community may change, and so keeping people aware and top of mind of how they can be supportive during traumatic times is so important.
Exactly. And there are many traumatic times. We had COVID, so we suffered from what we know as collective trauma.
Right,
Everybody was impacted, even if they don't feel like it. Our lives are changed because of COVID, and
right.
there's some trauma behind that.
And I think, look, I think this kind of segues perfectly into the new organization that you have, which is the Nonprofit Growth Strategies of Maryland, where you can go into a nonprofit organization to help them deal with issues like this. Is that what you're doing with that organization?
Absolutely. So I consider myself a change management expert. I've basically been able to raise 5 nonprofits, either out of the ashes because there was leadership malfeasance and they were about to close down, or um, I exponentially increased their budget over a period of time. So I know organizational change very, very well, and have done it numerous times.
Yeah.
And so my role at Nonprofit Growth Strategies of Maryland is to do the things that the leadership of the organization can't do, which a lot of times means stakeholder management, making sure there's two-way communication between staff and leadership to break down that resistance. The staff have to feel heard, for example, and oftentimes leadership botches that communication.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that
Because it's
happens in the corporate world as much as in the nonprofit world, but I get where you're you're going with that.
Yeah, so there's somebody to take the pressure off that, to know that internally the organization is being taken care of while leadership is managing the issue of lost funding or leadership transition, or whatever it might be.
Right. So organizations who might be watching right now that would what would they be dealing with right now that would we would suggest that they contact you so that you can help them get through? I mean, obviously you mentioned one like a lack of funding or frozen funds. that may require them to make some tough decisions down the road. What other types of examples are these organizations dealing with?
Some are dealing with some restructuring. So they see their organization as not being as efficient as it could be if they moved some things around.
Mm,
But that can be a big blow to staff, especially if you don't communicate with them.
right, right.
And not everybody is going to be in favor of it.
Of
So
course.
everybody has to be heard, though.
Yeah.
Um, so my job would to be go in and make sure that communication is happening. Make sure that staff understand as much as management can let them know, understand what's going on, so they don't feel left in the dark. Because you know what happens when you're left in the dark? People make assumptions, and
Yeah.
they aren't usually favorable.
No, no, not typically, not typically. No, and that really does, having somebody like you in helps to alleviate more of the rumor mill or people saying things that are inaccurate because they don't know. And yeah, that can, help with PR overall
Mhm.
for that organization by making sure everybody does understand from the first minute. Do you think that a board member or a board of a nonprofit would also look to bring you in if they were looking to make some changes as well to help from the maybe they want to make a leadership change? Do they bring you in early so that you can help them navigate that whole situation?
I'm trying to think of that movie with, I think it was George Clooney, where he went into organizations and fired people.
Yeah.
That was his job, and organizations hired him to do
Yeah.
that. And so I'm thinking of that, but because that's not, it's really much more if there's going to be an amiable separation. So,
Right.
somebody's retiring or somebody's going on to
Right.
another job or whatever it might be. Um, but I don't really get involved in the HR stuff.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Um,
That's hey, that's yeah, I don't think that would be very fun either. But anyway, yeah. Well,
yeah.
that's really cool. Okay, so if people want to find out more about either organization, where do they go? Because the Trauma Responsive Frederick, that is really for like leaders of community organizations or corporations who want to train make sure I have this right. I want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. It's on a larger scale. It's for trauma responsive, right? You guys are teaching organizations how to help deal with this trauma that maybe an organization is dealing with, maybe the greater population is dealing with, um, on that level. Is that correct?
Yes, and getting them to try and think in a trauma responsive way so that it is becomes institutionalized in their recruitment, in their workforce development, their financial
Right.
operations, those kinds of things.
And so to reach out to you for that, what's the website for that?
Trauma responsive Frederick, all one word, .org.
.org. Okay, that's a .org. And then if people are interested in having speaking with you about nonprofit growth strategies of Maryland, what is that web address?
Well, it's a long one too. It's nonprofitgrowthstrategies.net.
.net. Okay, that's good. I got that. We'll make sure those are on screen while we're chatting so people can get in touch with you about that. If there was one thing you'd want people to know about nonprofit growth strategies of Maryland, what would that be? What would the one takeaway be?
I think the one takeaway is that I offer tailored services that are appropriate for every situation, that each situation I go into, and that I'm not a cookie cutter firm. And then I'm a client centered organization. I'm not interested in taking on 10 clients when I can only handle 5 well.
Right. Right.
So, yes.
Well, that's excellent. Well, Inga, I know you are making an impact in a positive way on our community here in Frederick. We're so happy that you are here with these organizations, and wish you all the success with the nonprofit growth strategies. We don't think you need luck at all, though. I know it's going to be very successful,
Okay.
and we look forward to hearing more about this in the coming months.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on, Danny.